He thought no one would stop him. A former Marine, a parking lot, a single mother with nothing left but her dignity, and a child watching every second. But just when things were about to cross the line forever, a quiet man in a hoodie stepped forward. Stay with us until the end, because what happens next isn't just a fight. It's a moment that changes everything. The afternoon sun pressed down on the asphalt like a punishment, the kind that made everything shimmer just enough to feel unreal. Heat waves danced over the Chula Vista grocery store parking lot, warping the outlines of shopping carts and blurring the lines between everyday life and something far more dangerous. Somewhere between the rows of faded cars and the humming neon signs, a plastic grocery bag tore open with a sharp, wet crack. The sound didn't echo, but it didn't need to. It was the kind of noise that sliced through casual conversation, the kind of noise that made heads turn before minds caught up. Eggs hit the ground first, 5, maybe 6, splattering across the pavement in yellow streaks like paint on canvas. Then came the milk. A soft carton bounce, then a rupture. White liquid spread in a widening pool beneath a metal shopping cart now lying awkwardly on its side. Apples rolled in every direction, one slipping beneath the undercarriage of a pickup truck. A bruised orange landed beside a drain and trembled once before it stilled. The woman's hands moved fast, but not fast enough. She tried to block the impact, shield what little she had, but it was already gone. She stood small but unshaken, apron still tied around her waist from the double shift she'd just worked, her shoes worn and soaked now with milk and broken yolks. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun that had given up long ago. Behind her, a boy clung to the fabric of her apron, his wide, silent eyes locked on the figure that loomed above them. He was built like he wanted the world to know he was once military, muscles thick, ink etched deep into his arms, dog tags clinking with every breath he took, loud, heavy breaths that reeked of ego. Combat boots, still laced like they had somewhere to conquer, planted firmly like he still thought he owned the ground. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. His presence was noise enough. His smirk, the way he towered forward, the look that told the woman she was nothing more than an inconvenience he chose to crush. Those were louder than any insult. The boy behind her didn't speak, didn't cry. He just held tighter, and around them, everything else froze. A man stopped mid-step with a stroller. A woman with keys in hand forgot what she was unlocking. No one moved. No one dared. The air shifted, thickened. Not from heat now, but from the collective weight of hesitation. And from across the parking lane, in the quiet shade beside a smoothie cart long since closed, someone was watching. A man leaned against a pillar in the shadow, head tilted slightly downward. His frame was lean beneath a simple gray hoodie, hands loose at his sides, almost bored. A plastic drink cup hung from one hand, half full, forgotten. No one noticed him, just another face among the crowd, but his eyes were locked, unblinking, focused. And though he hadn't moved, something about him didn't sit right. Not wrong, but unreadable. Like a wire coiled too tight under cotton. Back in the sun, the ex-Marine stepped closer to the woman. He moved like a tank rolling over anything too slow to get out of the way. He grunted something beneath his breath as he jabbed a thick finger toward the scattered groceries. And then, without warning, he lifted a boot and stomped down into the last standing bag. Crackers shattered beneath the weight. A final carton of eggs split open with a dull, defeated pop. Milk dripped from the bottom like blood from an open wound. Still, the woman didn't move. She stood between the man and her son, eyes locked forward. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was survival, but even silence has a limit. The boy flinched, clutching tighter, his knuckles pale against her apron. More people were filming now, phones lifted at discreet angles, faces strained with the guilt of doing nothing but watching. The scene unfolded like something rehearsed and repeated far too often, and yet in the blur of tension and heat, the quiet man by the pillar remained still, until the Marine shifted again, not with words this time, with something worse. He stepped forward, boot angled, not toward the groceries, not toward the woman, but toward the child. And that's when the drink cup dropped. No splash, just the soft plastic thud of something forgotten, discarded, no longer needed. And from the shadows, the man in the hoodie stepped forward. One step, then another, and suddenly the crowd wasn't frozen from fear anymore. They were holding their breath for what came next. And it was only when the Marine lifted his boot again, this time aimed directly at the boy, that the stranger pulled back his hood, revealing a familiar face, eyes locked and burning, and took his first deliberate step toward the storm. The second his hood fell back, the sunlight caught his face and the silence deepened. Not because the crowd recognized him instantly, but because something in his posture made people straighten. Something quiet, uncompromising, a presence shaped by stillness, not sound. He walked slowly, the kind of pace that felt more like pressure than movement. No dramatic posture, no clenched fists, no bravado, just deliberate steps across scorched asphalt, every inch of him composed. His eyes never left the Marine, not once. The former soldier hadn't noticed him yet. His focus remained locked on the woman and the boy, mistaking the shift in atmosphere for compliance, not warning. He'd crossed the line, but hadn't seen it. Not yet. Jason Statham didn't need an introduction. He didn't walk like a fighter. He walked like a man who had nothing to prove and no time to waste. The hoodie, the worn boots, the effortless balance. It was all armor in disguise, and though no one had said his name, the weight of recognition was beginning to pull at the edges of the crowd's awareness. Whispers weren't spoken, but they stirred. He crossed the parking lane, past an abandoned stroller, a stray shopping cart, a puddle of milk still expanding like the scene itself. His hands remained down, fingers loose. He didn't posture. That would have given the Marine something to respond to, something to measure. But Jason didn't need measurement. He was a mirror, and what he reflected wasn't ego, it was consequence. The Marine finally noticed. His eyes narrowed, muscles tensed. He tilted his head like a wolf checking for threat. What he saw was an unarmed man in a hoodie, lean and calm. What he missed was everything else. Jason stopped just short of the mess on the ground, just outside the final cracked shell of a broken egg. He didn't step in. He didn't interrupt. He didn't even raise his voice. But the air did. It bent around him like a tide shifting. It wasn't noise. It was focus. Pure, undivided, concentrated presence. And the Marine, trained as he was, sensed it. His jaw shifted. His boots realigned. His chest lifted slightly, as if trying to reclaim space that had suddenly vanished. The crowd was watching now, not as spectators but as witnesses. Phones still blinked red, but no one smiled behind the screens. Not anymore. The woman didn't look back, but her shoulders dropped half an inch, just enough to suggest she'd felt something change. The boy beside her stopped trembling. He didn't know why, but the fear that had wrapped around him like chains was starting to loosen. The Marine's eyes narrowed. His breath hitched. His voice came out sharp, mocking, an attempt to reassert control. But words failed against what stood in front of him. Because Jason didn't react. He just observed, measured, calculated. The Marine took a step forward, chest flared. It wasn't a fight move, it was a challenge, a mistake. Jason raised one hand, not high, not fast, just enough. And the boot that had started to lift, whether in warning or intent, stopped midair. Jason didn't touch him, not yet. But his hand, suspended between them like a line in the sand, said everything. The Marine scoffed, postured, tilted his head and threw his weight into a push. It was crude, quick, born of adrenaline and pride. Jason absorbed it like water hitting stone. His feet shifted half a step back, not from force but from intention, from control, from leverage. And then, almost imperceptibly, he lowered his stance. It wasn't a fighter's pose. It was a statement. Shoulders relaxed, hands loose, core centered. Every part of him said, "This will end when I say it ends." The Marine blinked. That blink was the only warning he got, because in the space between one breath and the next, Jason's right foot slid behind him, heel grounded, toes angled. A pivot, a weight transfer, no punch, no strike, just precision. The Marine lunged again, more frustrated now. His arms moved first, driven by reaction more than strategy. And that was when Jason moved. Not fast, fluid, like smoke slipping through cracks in concrete. He sidestepped, body low, shifting around the Marine's weight. One hand brushed the elbow, redirecting. The other hovered near the wrist, ready but still open. The Marine's body stuttered mid-motion, his momentum betrayed by his own aggression. Jason didn't attack. He realigned. It was worse than a punch. It was the absence of retaliation, the quiet refusal to play by expected rules. The crowd had never seen violence undone so gently, and the Marine, trained though he was, hadn't either. He took a half step back, confused, now cautious. Jason tilted his head, almost as if considering whether to give him another chance to retreat. He didn't blink, didn't breathe heavier. He was still calm, steady, terrifyingly unchanged. The Marine's hands curled. He wouldn't back down. Not because he had something to fight for, but because he didn't know how to lose without swinging. And Jason knew it. He waited and waited until the next lunge came, and that's when Jason dropped his weight, pivoted his right foot across the asphalt, and positioned his body with the precision of a storm just before it hits. And the crowd never saw the punch, only the way the Marine's body shifted mid-air, twisted, then crumpled to the pavement with a weightless thud, like something had cut the power from inside. Jason stood above him, unmoved, eyes fixed, and the parking lot went dead silent once more. He didn't fall hard. That was the unsettling part. There was no brutal crash, no exaggerated collapse. The Marine's body hit the pavement like a tree felled in the wrong season. Unexpected, too quiet, too clean. His shoulders struck first, followed by his hip, then his arm flailed out, trying to catch what had already passed. A thin line of sweat traced his temple, smearing dust as he blinked up into the blinding sun. Jason hadn't moved from his spot. He remained where he'd pivoted, stance still grounded, posture open, not a single muscle tightened in aggression. His breathing hadn't changed. His heartbeat, if it could be seen, would have read like still water. There was no need to advance. Control doesn't chase chaos. It waits for it to come again. The crowd wasn't breathing. They had gone from passive observers to unwitting participants in something sacred. And somewhere between the pause of violence and the heavy sound of the ex-Marine's labored breath, the onlookers began to understand. This wasn't a brawl. This was a dismantling, not of a man's body, but of his illusion of power. The Marine scrambled to one knee, the rough texture of the asphalt grinding against skin that had never planned to kneel. His pride, not pain, pulled him upward. His chest heaved, not with effort, but disbelief. He didn't understand what had just happened. He only knew he had to make it stop. And that's what made it worse, because Jason had offered him the exit, and he didn't take it. The Marine charged again. This time, louder. He pushed off his back foot with the desperation of someone who no longer believed they were in control. His hands came up in a trained guard, shoulders squared, jaw clenched. But the precision of his movement had already been compromised by anger, by embarrassment, by the eyes now locked on him from all directions. Jason didn't flinch. He stepped forward once, not away, not aside. Into the momentum. His left foot pivoted across the asphalt, guiding the Marine's weight just a few inches off course. A palm met the outside of the arm, then another at the chest. Not a strike, a redirection, a reset. The Marine staggered, not because of impact, but because his force had no place to land. That was when Jason's hand closed, not in a fist, just enough to grip the edge of a collar, twist the wrist, and slide his foot behind the Marine's lead leg. It wasn't a takedown. It was gravity, reprogrammed. The Marine hit the ground again, this time on his side, and this time with a gasp that left more than air behind. There was confusion in it, humility, and the first bitter taste of fear. Jason let go the moment balance was lost. He didn't hold on, didn't follow through. He stepped back, resetting his stance once more, not to gain distance, but to give it. Another invitation to walk away, another invitation ignored. The woman hadn't moved. Her hands still hovered behind her child, but now her posture had changed. Not stronger, but less guarded, as if something ancient in her recognized what she was seeing. Not a man saving the day, but someone reminding the world what real strength looked like when it wasn't loud. And the boy no longer clung to her apron. He watched, wide-eyed, still, but watching. The Marine pulled himself upright again, face red now, not with exertion but humiliation. He spat, dusted off the back of his jeans with the kind of fury only a collapsing ego can summon, and then he did something that pulled the crowd back into breath. He laughed. A short, empty sound that tried to sound like power but echoed like denial. Then he stepped in again, fast. Too fast. Leading with his right, telegraphing from the shoulder, desperation tightening his form into something sloppy. Jason sidestepped, not left, not right, just enough. His hand lifted, fingers open, catching the Marine's shoulder mid-turn and guiding it forward as his foot slid behind the opposite leg. The Marine stumbled again. His balance betrayed him like a friend who had finally had enough. Jason didn't hit him, not once. He let him fall. And in that fall, the crowd heard the lesson louder than any blow could have delivered. Pain could be temporary, but shame lingered. Jason didn't gloat, he didn't smirk. He stood still, like a statue carved out of intention. And the Marine, panting now, hand on his ribs, eyes darting between the phones and the faces and the man who refused to fight him back, began to tremble. It wasn't rage anymore. It was reckoning. A slow unraveling of the myth he had wrapped himself in for years, the myth that might made right. That volume equaled power. That silence was submission. He now stood before a man who disproved all of it. Jason shifted his weight slightly. Not a move of aggression, but a question. Is this enough? The Marine blinked sweat out of his eyes. And for a second, just one fragile heartbeat of time, he hesitated. But pride is a dangerous thing. It tells you to lunge when you should kneel. It tells you to swing when you should surrender. And so he did it again. One last time. And just as the ex-Marine stepped forward with everything he had left, Jason moved, not out of rage, not out of defense, but out of finality. What came next wouldn't be a lesson. It would be a warning carved into the pavement for everyone watching. He shouldn't have charged again, not now. Not with everything already stripped down to silence and sweat. But that's the curse of a man who mistakes noise for strength. Pride doesn't whisper. It screams on its way to being broken. The ex-Marine lunged with everything left in him. One last desperate fusion of rage and shame wrapped in a punch. But Jason didn't brace. He didn't back away. He moved. Not violently, not forcefully. He moved like water moving downhill. Inevitable, unshakable, and far more dangerous than stone. One step in, one hand up, one twist of the wrist at the moment of contact. And then the Marine's weight betrayed him completely. His own momentum turned against him, bent by precision and timing into a collapse disguised as combat. Jason shifted his balance, redirected the incoming mass, and brought the man down without spectacle, just structure. The thud was final. The kind of sound that silences even thought. The crowd collectively exhaled, but no one said a word. Some phones were still recording, but fewer now. Not out of disinterest, but reverence. What had begun as entertainment had shifted into something raw, something human, something true. The Marine groaned, tried to roll over, but Jason was already beside him. One knee to the pavement, one hand pinning the arm that had just swung at him. The other hand pressed lightly across the chest, not to cause pain, but to remind. To say without words, enough. And it was. The Marine stopped writhing, not from defeat, but from clarity. His breath came out uneven, one hand clutching his ribs, The other curled loosely beneath his chest like a man unsure whether he should rise or simply stay down and disappear. Jason stood, slowly, smoothly, without triumph. He took 2 steps back, giving space, not claiming victory. He didn't flex. He didn't taunt. He simply stood, grounded like a verdict in human form. And that's when the crowd began to understand. This wasn't just about a fight. This was about what happens when someone finally says, "No more." The silence held like glass, until the Marine spoke. His voice was thin, ragged, still dripping with the last fragments of a broken facade. But Jason didn't answer. He didn't need to. He just pivoted, one foot over the other, and turned to walk away. And that's when the sirens cut through the heat. A police cruiser pulled into the lot, not fast but assured. 2 officers stepped out, their faces neutral, but their pace direct. Someone in the crowd had made the call. They'd seen enough, not just of the violence, but of the truth behind it. Jason didn't flinch. He didn't stop. He didn't need to watch what came next. The Marine tried to stand, but his legs betrayed him again. His shirt was damp, his face streaked with dust and sweat. One sleeve hung low where his shoulder had nearly dislocated. A faint streak of blood marked the corner of his mouth. Barely noticeable, but there. The kind of blood that says something had finally gotten through. The officers didn't yell. They didn't rush. They approached with the weight of finality. One spoke. The other gently took the Marine's arms behind his back. A click echoed, sharp and deliberate. And with it, the last piece of illusion snapped. The man who had entered that parking lot thinking he was invincible, untouchable, now stood cuffed, eyes low, surrounded by silence. Jason was already halfway across the lot. Near the curb, the woman stood holding her son, eyes still wide, mouth still unsure how to shape the gratitude building behind her ribs. She didn't move. Not because she didn't want to, but because part of her felt like this man wasn't meant to stay. Like he belonged more to myth now than to reality. But the boy, he didn't hesitate. He ran. Small sneakers smacking against the asphalt. He caught up just before Jason stepped off the lot entirely. The boy's chest heaved from the effort, one hand clutching something tight, crumpled, small, a receipt maybe. Jason turned. He didn't smile. He didn't kneel. He simply waited. The boy reached out and offered the paper. Jason took it. Then, after a pause, he reached into his back pocket and pulled out something folded, soft from wear. A $5 bill, weathered, faded like it had lived through years of pockets and pavement. He handed it to the boy, placed it carefully in his palm. For the eggs. Maybe some chocolate too. The boy didn't speak. He just nodded, and Jason turned again. One last step, one last breath of heat. And then, a voice from the crowd, young but steady, not mocking, not joking, just awe. That was Jason Statham. But Jason didn't turn. He didn't need to. He raised one hand, fingers loose, not waving, just existing, and kept walking. And in that space where anger had burned and pride had broken, something remained. A silence better than applause. A mother and child stood taller. A crowd stood stiller. And somewhere near the shopping cart bay, the boy unfolded the receipt again. 3 words had been scribbled in pencil. Not a signature. A message. Protect. Don't provoke. He smiled, because he understood now. Strength doesn't roar. It stands. And as Jason disappeared into the glow of the fading afternoon, the lot felt different. Not safer, not quieter, but stronger. As if the ground itself had remembered what it meant to have someone who still knew when to stand up, and how. Not all heroes shout. Some just stand still. And sometimes one man's silence is louder than the world's noise. If this story moved you, even just a little, don't forget to subscribe for more stories that hit deeper than a punch. Like the video, share it with someone who needs to remember what strength really is. And we'll see you in the next one, where silence might just speak louder than justice.